The bell above the door chimed as David Rivers looked up from the circuit board spread across his workbench. A dragon walked into his shop, ducking slightly to fit through the doorway, despite her relatively modest size for her species. She carried a small device in her clawed hands and wore simple, traveling clothes that had seen better days. David wiped his hands on a rag and walked to the counter. "Hey there, what brings you in today?" The dragon blinked, her golden eyes studying him with an expression he could not quite read. She placed the device on the counter carefully. "This translation unit has stopped working properly. I was told your shop handles repairs for all species." "Sure do." David picked up the device and turned it over in his hands. "When did it start acting up?" 2 days ago. It began mixing languages randomly, then stopped responding altogether." David nodded and pulled out his diagnostic scanner. "I could take a look right now if you want to wait. Probably 30 minutes, maybe an hour depending on what is wrong inside." The dragon tilted her head slightly. "You seem very calm about serving my kind. Why would not I be?" David plugged the scanner into the device. "You need something fixed. I fix things." Pretty straightforward. She watched him work in silence for a moment. David noticed her observing his movements, but thought nothing of it. Lots of aliens found human behavior interesting. "Most beings show more reaction when a dragon enters their establishment," she said quietly. David glanced up and shrugged. "Well, fear does not fix translators. And you came here for help? Not to cause trouble, right?" "Correct. Then we are good." The scanner beeped, and David frowned at the readout. "Ah, there's your problem. The Centauri connector chips are failing. Those things are cheap garbage, honestly. They use substandard materials to save costs. Can it be repaired?" "Yeah, I have better replacement chips in stock. I will swap them out and recalibrate the whole system. Should work better than before." He quoted her a price that made her eyes widen slightly. "That seems very reasonable. It is fair for the work involved." David gestured to the small seating area near his desk. "You're welcome to wait here if you like. I have tea if you want some. Got a few different varieties since I have customers from all over." The dragon stared at him for a long moment. "You offer me tea? Well, yeah. You are waiting. Might as well be comfortable." David pointed to the small electric kettle on the side table. "I have earth black tea, Rigelian mint blend, and something from Tau Ceti that tastes like flowers. Fair warning, that last one is kind of weird. I will try the earth tea." "Good choice. Give me 2 minutes to get this started, and I will bring you a cup." Beth, his assistant, emerged from the back storage room, carrying a box of components. She nearly dropped it when she saw the dragon sitting in their waiting area. David caught her and gave a small shake of his head that meant act normal. Beth recovered quickly and set the box down. "Hi, welcome to Rivers Repair." The dragon nodded politely. "Thank you." David prepared the tea while his diagnostic program ran through its initial checks on the translator. He brought the cup over to the dragon and set it down on the small table beside her chair. "Careful, it is pretty hot." She looked at the cup, then at him. "You concern yourself with my comfort. Why would not I? You're a customer." David returned to his workbench and began carefully opening the translator casing. "So, are you traveling through or staying on Earth for a while?" "Traveling. I wanted to see your world for myself." "How are you finding it?" David asked as he worked, not looking up. "Different than I expected." "Yeah? How so?" The dragon sipped her tea slowly. "I was told humans were aggressive and unpredictable, yet you have shown me nothing but courtesy." David laughed. "Aggressive and unpredictable. Well, I guess we have that reputation. But most of us are just trying to get through the day like everyone else." He removed the failed chip carefully. "The unpredictable part might be fair, though. We do not really do things the way other species expect, such as not treating different species differently just because of reputation or status. A customer is a customer." He installed the new chip and began the calibration sequence. "My dad ran the shop before me. He always said good work speaks for itself, and everyone deserves the same level of service. A wise philosophy. It made sense to me." David ran another diagnostic. "This is looking good. Few more minutes, and you'll be all set." Beth was pretending to organize inventory, but kept glancing at their dragon customer. David knew she wanted to say something, but was holding back. Good kid, knew when to keep quiet. The dragon finished her tea and set the cup down gently. "May I ask why you chose to run a repair shop? You clearly have significant technical skill." David shrugged. "I used to work for one of the big tech corporations. Made good money but hated every minute of it. Too much politics, too many people trying to climb over each other. This is simpler. Someone has a problem. I fix it, they pay me, everyone is happy." "You prefer simplicity to power." "I prefer honesty to games," David corrected. "Power seems like too much work for not enough reward." The dragon made a soft sound that might have been amusement, an unusual perspective. Maybe. The diagnostic program chimed completion. David reassembled the translator and tested it thoroughly. Okay, all finished. This should work perfectly now, and those new chips will last you years instead of months. She stood and approached the counter, examining the device. She spoke a few words in what sounded like her native language, and the translator rendered them perfectly into English. Excellent work. Thanks. Like I said, it is what I do. David processed the payment. If you have any other issues while you're on Earth, feel free to come back. The dragon took the translator and paused at the door. Do you work every day? Most days, yeah. Why? I may have another device that requires attention. David smiled. Shop opens at 9. Bring coffee if you come early. She left without another word. Beth immediately rushed over to David's desk. Do you have any idea who that probably was? Beth pulled up her datapad. A dragon who needed her translator fixed. David, I think that might have been someone really important. Like royalty important. David went back to the circuit board he had been working on before. Beth, everyone who comes in here gets the same treatment. That is the point. Beth shook her head but smiled. You are impossible sometimes. Impossibly consistent, David replied. Now help me finish this repair before lunch. Outside, the dragon walked slowly down the street, turning the translator over in her hands. For the first time in longer than she could remember, someone had treated her like a person instead of a title. The feeling was strange and unfamiliar. She decided she would definitely return tomorrow. Beth arrived at the shop early and immediately cornered David before he could even start the coffee maker. She thrust her datapad in his face with a news article displayed on the screen. Read this and tell me I am wrong. David squinted at the bright screen. Beth, it is barely 8 in the morning. Just read it. The article showed an official portrait of Empress Silvara of the Draconis Imperium. David studied the image and felt his stomach drop slightly. The features matched their customer from yesterday, though the dragon in the photo was larger and wore elaborate ceremonial armor. Okay, so maybe she's important. Maybe? David, she rules 3-star systems. She commands the largest military fleet outside the core worlds. She could buy our entire planet if she wanted to. David handed back the datapad and started making coffee. And she came here to get her translator fixed, which I did. What exactly am I supposed to do differently? I do not know. Maybe act like you realize you met one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Why would that change anything? David poured water into the machine. She needed help. I helped her. That is the job. Beth opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. You are either the bravest person I know or the most oblivious. I prefer to think of it as consistent. The shop door chimed at exactly 9 o'clock. The dragon from yesterday entered, this time carrying a small data storage device and a container that smelled wonderful. You mentioned coffee, she said, placing the container on the counter. David grinned. I did not actually think you would bring some. I do not make statements I do not intend to follow through on. She opened the container to reveal a rich, dark liquid that definitely was not standard Earth coffee. This is from my homeworld. I thought you might appreciate trying something new. That is really thoughtful. Thank you. David found 2 clean cups and poured for both of them. The coffee tasted complex and smooth with hints of something almost like cinnamon. This is incredible. I'm pleased you enjoy it. The dragon placed the data device on the counter. I'm having trouble with this storage unit. It will not interface with standard galactic systems. David picked it up and immediately noticed it was not actually broken. The connection ports showed no wear, and the device hummed with perfect functionality. He glanced at the dragon, who watched him with those unreadable golden eyes. Let me take a look, he said neutrally. Beth excused herself to the back room, probably to avoid saying something awkward. David set up his diagnostic equipment and pretended to scan the perfectly functional device. So you're staying on Earth a bit longer? He asked casually. It seems my schedule has become unexpectedly flexible. Nice when that happens. David pulled up a false diagnostic screen. How are you finding the planet so far? Surprisingly pleasant. Your people are less formal than I anticipated. Yeah, we're not big on ceremony. Drive some of the other species crazy. David opened the device, casing carefully. I think a lot of humans figured out that all the bowing and fancy titles were just ways to keep people in their place. We did enough of that in our own history. The dragon leaned forward slightly. You believe hierarchy is artificial? Not artificial exactly, just overused. Sure, some people are better at certain jobs than others. That makes sense. But treating someone like they are worth less because they were born in the wrong place or to the wrong family, that is just waste. Waste of what? Potential. Ideas. Connection. David made a show of adjusting a component. My grandfather used to say the person who could save the world might be born anywhere, to anyone. If you set up systems that only let certain people speak, you might miss the one voice that had the answer you needed. The dragon was quiet for a moment. That is a profound observation. David shrugged. Just common sense, really. Everyone has something to offer if you pay attention. Do you apply this philosophy in your work? I try to. Every customer who walks in here has a problem they need solved. Does not matter if they are rich or poor, human or alien, important or ordinary. The problem still needs fixing, and I'm going to give it my best work either way. Even if they cannot pay well, I set fair prices. If someone genuinely cannot afford it, we work something out. David looked up from the device. Money is important, but it is not the only thing that matters. What matters more? Doing good work. Being honest. Treating people right. David sat back. I know that probably sounds simple, but I think most problems come from people forgetting the basics. The dragon sipped her coffee slowly. Tell me about your leadership structure. Earth has a council system, correct? Yeah, the Planetary Council. Representatives from different regions and groups. They argue a lot, but eventually make decisions. Does that not create chaos? Sometimes, David admitted, but it also means no single person has too much power. We learned that lesson the hard way over and over in our history. Give one person too much control, and eventually they start making decisions that benefit them instead of everyone else. You do not believe in strong, singular leadership. David considered the question carefully. I think leadership is necessary, but it should not be permanent or absolute. The best leaders I have known were the ones who listened more than they talked and admitted when they were wrong. The worst ones were the people who thought they were too important to hear other opinions. The dragon set down her cup with deliberate care. What if someone was born into leadership? What if they had no choice in the matter? That would be tough, David said honestly. I imagine it would be really lonely. Everyone wanting something from you. Everyone treating you like a position instead of a person. You would never know who actually cared about you versus who just wanted access to your power. The dragon looked away toward the shop window. That is a remarkably accurate assessment. David finished his fake diagnostic and closed the device casing. Okay, I found the issue. Just needed a firmware update and some minor calibration. He handed it back to her. Should work with any galactic system now. She took the device and their fingers touched briefly. What do I owe you? How about we call it even for the coffee? That stuff was amazing. You would accept that trade? Why not? Fair exchange of value. You brought something I enjoyed. I fixed something you needed. David smiled. See? Simple. The dragon stood there for a long moment, then did something that surprised him. She smiled back, a genuine expression that softened her features completely. Would you be willing to meet me this evening? There is an observation deck at the northern spaceport. The sunset view is supposed to be quite beautiful. David hesitated. He had inventory to finish and invoices to process. But something in the way she asked, almost tentative, made him reconsider. Yeah, okay. What time? 1800 hours. I can do that. David wrote down the location details. See you then. After she left, Beth emerged from the back room with wide eyes. David, she just asked you on a date. It is not a date. Just two people watching a sunset. Two people, one of whom is an empress. David returned to his workbench. Beth, can you handle closing today? I apparently have plans. Beth shook her head in disbelief. You are the strangest person I have ever met. I'm going to take that as a compliment. It was not meant as one. But she was smiling when she said it, and David counted that as a win. David arrived at the spaceport observation deck 10 minutes early because his mother had raised him to be punctual. The massive transparent dome offered a view of ships launching and landing against the backdrop of Earth's sunset. Orange and pink light painted the clouds while orbital stations glinted like distant stars. The dragon was already there, standing near the railing and watching the sky. She turned when she heard his footsteps. You came. Said I would. David joined her at the railing. This is a pretty great view. I thought so. She gestured at the departing ships. I have visited hundreds of worlds, but there is something unique about Earth. Your sky has a specific quality of light I have not seen elsewhere. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching a large transport vessel rise slowly toward orbit. David noticed she seemed more relaxed than in the shop, as if some invisible weight had lifted from her shoulders. Can I ask you something? David said finally. Of course. Why did you really come back to my shop today? That data device was not broken. The dragon did not seem surprised he had noticed. No, it was not. So why? She took a long breath. I want to know if your behavior yesterday was genuine or simply an act. Many beings pretend equality while harboring different thoughts internally. I needed to understand what you were. And what did you decide? That you are exactly who you appear to be. It is remarkably rare. She turned to face him directly. Do you know who I am? Empress Silvara of the Draconis Imperium. Beth figured it out and showed me the articles. Yet you treated me no differently today. David shrugged. Why would I? You are still the person who came into my shop. The title does not change that. To most beings, the title changes everything. Well, I'm not most beings. David leaned against the railing. Look, I get that you are important and powerful and all that. But right now, you are just someone watching a sunset with me. That feels more real than any amount of ceremony or fancy words. Silvara looked at him with an expression that might have been wonder. When was the last time someone spoke to me like this? Centuries, perhaps. Everyone measures their words carefully, always calculating what they can gain or how they might offend. Even my advisors speak in circles. That sounds exhausting. It is profoundly lonely. The words came out soft, almost vulnerable. I rule millions. I command fleets. I shape policy that affects entire worlds. And yet I cannot remember the last time I simply talked with someone who wanted nothing from me. David thought about that. Is that why you are here? On Earth, I mean. Disguised as a regular traveler? Partially. I told my council I wanted to observe humanity directly to understand your species better before finalizing certain treaties. That was true, but not the whole truth. What is the whole truth? Silvara looked back at the sky. I wanted to remember what it felt like to be treated as a person instead of a position. To walk into a place where no one knew my name or cared about my title. To be seen for who I am rather than what I represent. That makes sense to me. Does it? Sure. I left my corporate job for similar reasons. Not the same scale, obviously, but the principle is there. Too many people treating me like a tool or an obstacle instead of a person. It wears you down after a while. Yes, Silvara said quietly. It does. A sleek diplomatic vessel launched from a nearby pad, its engines glowing blue against the darkening sky. David watched it climb until it disappeared into the clouds. Can I ask you something now? Silvara said. Fair is fair. You said earlier that good leaders listen and admit mistakes. But what happens when a leader has been making mistakes for a very long time? When entire systems are built on flawed foundations? David thought carefully before answering. I think recognizing the mistakes is the first step. Then you start making changes, even if they are small ones at first. And if those changes upset people who benefit from the current system, then you have to decide what matters more, keeping the peace or doing what is right. David looked at her directly. Why do I get the feeling this is not a theoretical question? Silvara was quiet for a long moment. My people have built our empire on dominance. We are powerful, so we lead. Other species are weaker, so they follow. It has been this way for thousands of years. But you are questioning it now. Your species does not work that way. Humans are not the strongest or the smartest or the longest lived. Yet you have influence that exceeds your apparent capabilities. I wanted to understand why. And did you figure it out? I think so. You treat beings as equals by default. You assume good faith until proven otherwise. You value collaboration over domination. Silvara spread her claws on the railing. It should not work by all traditional measures. Yet it does. Maybe the traditional measures are wrong, David suggested. That is what frightens my advisors. If I am right, if your approach truly is more effective, then our entire civilization has been building on a mistaken foundation for millennia. Change is hard, David acknowledged. But staying wrong just because it is easier does not seem like a great option either. Silvara laughed, a warm sound that seemed to surprise her. You make it sound simple. The concept is simple. Doing it is the hard part. They watched the rest of the sunset together, the sky fading from orange to deep purple. More ships launched and landed, a constant flow of commerce and travel that paid them no attention. Finally, Silvara spoke again. I should leave soon. My guards have been remarkably patient, but they will start to worry. Guard, I'm never truly alone, even in disguise. They remain at a discreet distance. She gestured vaguely behind them. Right now, they're probably having heart attacks that I am speaking so openly with a human they have not vetted. David glanced back, but saw no one obvious. Will you get in trouble for this? I am the Empress. I do not get in trouble. She paused. Though I will certainly receive a lengthy lecture about security protocols. Worth it. She smiled at him, that same genuine expression from a shop. Absolutely. As if summoned by the conversation, several large dragons in military armor appeared from various positions around the deck. They moved quickly but carefully, forming a protective circle. Your Imperial Majesty, the lead dragon said with barely controlled panic. We must insist you return to secure quarters immediately. David blinked. Imperial Majesty. Silvara sighed. It seems our time has ended somewhat abruptly. The guards looked at David with suspicion and what might have been hostility. One of them moved toward him, but Silvara raised a claw sharply. He is not a threat. Stand down. But Majesty, he has had unauthorized contact. I authorized it. That is all you need to know. Silvara turned back to David. I apologize for this. They mean well, but can be overzealous. David held up his hands peacefully. Hey, they're just doing their job. I get it. Majesty, we must leave now. Another guard insisted. Silvara nodded reluctantly. David Rivers, thank you for this evening. It meant more than you probably realize. Anytime, David said honestly. And hey, you know where my shop is. Door is always open. Something in her expression shifted, becoming softer. I will remember that. The guards escorted her away quickly, several of them keeping themselves between her and David until they were out of sight. David stood alone on the observation deck as full darkness fell. His comm device chimed with a message from an unknown number. Thank you for seeing me. Not the title, just me. That was a gift I did not know I needed. David smiled and looked up at the stars beginning to appear overhead. You are welcome, he typed back. The response came immediately. I hope we will speak again soon. Me too. David stayed for a while longer, watching the ships and thinking about lonely empresses and the strange paths life sometimes took. Eventually, he headed home, wondering if he would ever hear from her again. He hoped he would. 3 weeks passed without word from Silvara. David returned to his normal routine, fixing devices and serving customers. Though Beth noticed he checked his messages more often than usual. Still nothing. Beth asked one afternoon while they organized inventory. She's probably busy running an empire, David said, trying to sound casual about it. That seems like it would take up a lot of time. You could message her first and say what? Hey, remember me, the repair guy? Just want to chat while you're managing interstellar politics? Beth rolled her eyes. You are impossible. But that evening, as David closed up shop, the galactic news feeds caught his attention. Every major outlet was reporting the same story. Empress Silvara had announced sweeping reforms to imperial policy. David sat down and read through multiple articles, piecing together what was happening. The Empress had dissolved several old councils and created new advisory positions open to non-dragon species. She had issued new guidelines about diplomatic relations that emphasized partnership over dominance. She was implementing what the commentators called listening tours, where she met directly with common citizens of various species without the usual formal barriers. The response across the galaxy ranged from confusion to cautious optimism to outright resistance. Several noble dragon houses had issued statements questioning whether these changes were appropriate or wise. Some praised her progressive thinking. Others called her dangerously radical. Beth read over his shoulder. This all started after she met you. That is probably a coincidence. David, she spent 3 days on Earth, talked to you twice, then went back and started changing everything. That is not a coincidence. His comm device chimed with a message on the private channel Silvara had given him. His heart jumped slightly as he opened it. I imagine you have seen the news. It has been a complicated few weeks. My council believes I have lost my mind. Half the noble houses are demanding explanations. But I keep thinking about what you said about foundations built on mistakes. Some things need to change, even when it is hard. Especially when it is hard. I hope you're well. David wrote back carefully. I saw the news. Sounds like you're shaking things up pretty good. How are you holding up? The response came quickly. Tired. Frustrated. But certain I am doing the right thing. That certainty is new. Usually I second-guess myself constantly. What changed? I remembered what it felt like to be treated like a person. Then I realized I have been treating entire populations as less than people for my entire reign. I cannot continue that way. David sat back and thought about what to say. This was bigger than him, bigger than their brief connection. She was changing the policies of entire star systems. That takes guts, he typed finally. Admitting you were wrong is hard. Doing something about it is harder. I find myself wishing I could ask your advice more directly. Text messages lack nuance. So ask. There was a longer pause this time. Then, would you be willing to come to the Imperial Palace? I need someone who will tell me the truth without calculating political angles. My advisors mean well, but they are part of the system I am trying to change. David stared at the message. Beth was watching him with wide eyes. She wants you to go to the Imperial Palace, Beth said. You have to go. I run a repair shop, not a consulting business for empresses. David, she needs help. Your help specifically. And you like her. I barely know her. You know her well enough to matter. Beth crossed her arms. Look, I can handle the shop for a few weeks. We do not have any major projects right now. Go. David looked at the message again. He thought about Silvara standing on that observation deck, talking about loneliness and needing to be seen as a person. He thought about the vulnerability in her voice when she admitted how isolated she felt. He typed, "When do you need me there?" The response was immediate. "Is tomorrow too soon? I can send a ship. Tomorrow is fine. Send me the details." "Thank you, David. You have no idea how much this means to me." David looked at Beth. "I think I just agreed to go advise an alien empress on imperial policy." "Yeah, you did. This is the weirdest thing that has ever happened in this shop, and we once fixed a device that could translate dolphin languages." "That was a strange week," David agreed. The next morning, an unmarked but clearly expensive transport landed at the designated coordinates. David packed a small bag with practical clothes and toiletries, feeling completely unprepared for whatever was about to happen. The transport was comfortable but not ostentatious, with a small crew who treated him politely without the formal stiffness he had expected. The journey took most of a day, transitioning through 3 different jump points before arriving at the Imperial homeworld. David had seen pictures, but nothing prepared him for the reality. The planet gleamed with cities that looked like they had been carved from precious metals and crystal. The Imperial Palace dominated the capital, a massive structure that seemed to grow organically from the mountain it sat upon. The transport landed on a private platform where Silvara herself waited, without ceremony or guards visible. She had returned to her full size, larger and more impressive than her disguised form. But her expression was relieved when she saw him. "You actually came." "Said I would." David stepped off the transport and looked around. "This place is incredible. Thank you for coming on such short notice. I know this is far outside your normal work." "Way outside," David agreed. "But you asked, so here I am." Silvara guided him through corridors of stunning beauty, each room more elaborate than the last. They passed servants and officials who stopped and stared at the human walking casually beside their empress. She ignored the attention completely. "I have a council session in 2 hours," she said as they walked. "I want you to observe. Say nothing, just watch and listen. Afterward, I want your honest opinion about what you see. What exactly am I looking for? Anything that strikes you as wrong or dysfunctional. You see things differently than we do. That perspective is valuable." They reached a suite of rooms that had been prepared for him. The space was larger than his entire shop, decorated with obvious care for human preferences. "These are your quarters. You have full access to the palace network and can go anywhere except the secure military sections. If you need anything, just ask any staff member. This is too much. It is appropriate for an advisor to the Empress." Silvara smiled slightly. "Which is apparently what you are now, whether you wanted the job or not. I did not exactly apply for this position. The best advisors rarely do." She moved toward the door. "Rest for a bit if you need to. Someone will come get you before the council session." After she left, David sat down on a chair that probably cost more than his yearly income and tried to process what he had gotten himself into. He was a repair shop owner from Earth about to observe the inner workings of an interstellar empire. "Well," he said to the empty room, "this is definitely outside my normal Tuesday." His comm device chimed with a message from Beth. "Don't mess this up. Also, take pictures." David laughed despite his nervousness. At least some things stayed normal. Even when everything else went completely sideways, he had 2 hours to prepare himself for whatever came next. Somehow, he did not think it would be enough time. The council chamber was exactly what David expected, and somehow worse. Massive pillars of dark stone rose to a vaulted ceiling covered in historical murals. The council members sat in positions clearly designed to emphasize hierarchy, with the most important dragons closest to Silvara's throne at the center. David had been given a small seat off to the side, where he could observe without being noticed. A young dragon aide had whispered that he should remain absolutely silent during proceedings. The session began with formal greetings that took almost 15 minutes. Each council member addressed Silvara with elaborate titles and flowery language that said almost nothing of substance. She responded with equal formality, though David noticed tension in her posture. The first actual topic was a trade dispute with the Centauri Confederation. A senior dragon presented the situation using such complicated language that David almost lost track of the actual problem. From what he could tell, the Centauri wanted to renegotiate shipping routes, but the dragon made it sound like a personal insult to the Imperium. "Clearly they seek to undermine our authority," the dragon concluded. "We must respond with strength." Another council member agreed immediately. "Any sign of weakness will be exploited. We should increase tariffs and restrict their access to our stations." David watched as one dragon after another supported the aggressive response. No one asked why the Centauri wanted to renegotiate. No one suggested talking to them directly. They all seemed more concerned with appearances than solutions. Silvara listened to each statement, her face neutral. Are there other perspectives on this matter? Silence. Several dragons glanced at each other, but no one spoke. Very well. We will implement the suggested tariff increases. Silvara moved to the next agenda item without enthusiasm. The pattern repeated through several topics. Council members presented problems, suggested responses that emphasized dominance, and everyone agreed with minimal discussion. David began to understand what Silvara had meant about speaking in circles. Near the end of the session, an older dragon raised a concern about the new advisory positions being open to non-dragon species. Your Majesty, while we respect your vision, there's concern about allowing outsiders into positions of influence. The Imperial Council has been dragon only for 3,000 years. This tradition exists for good reasons. What reason specifically? Silvara asked. The dragon seemed surprised by the question. Well, dragons have proven leadership capabilities. Other species lack our perspective and experience. Or perhaps they have perspectives we lack, Silvara said carefully. With respect, Majesty, other species do not understand the burden of leadership at this scale. They cannot comprehend what is required. Several other council members murmured agreement. David noticed that none of them directly contradicted Silvara, but they made their opposition clear through tone and body language. Silvara's tail twitched with what might have been frustration. I see. We will discuss this further at our next session. She stood, signaling the meeting's end. Thank you all for your counsel. The dragons filed out in order of rank, each bowing formally before leaving. David waited until the chamber emptied except for him and Silvara. She slumped slightly on her throne, looking exhausted. You may speak now. David stood and approached. That was frustrating to watch. I cannot imagine how it felt to actually be in it. You saw the problem then. Hard to miss. Nobody actually said anything real the entire time. It was all performance. Silvara gestured for him to sit in one of the closer chairs. Tell me what you observed. Specific details. David thought about how to phrase his thoughts. Okay, first thing, the trade dispute with the Centauri. Nobody asked why they wanted to renegotiate. Everyone assumed bad faith immediately. That is standard diplomatic posture. Maybe, but it is also stupid. What if they have a legitimate reason? What if the current routes actually do not work well for them anymore? You could have a solution instead of conflict, but you would need to actually talk to them first. Silvara tilted her head. Continue. The whole session was like that. Every problem was treated as someone challenging your authority instead of, an actual problem to solve. And everyone agreed with everyone else constantly. When that old dragon complained about the new advisory positions, at least 3 others wanted to argue against it, but nobody did. How could you tell? Body language. The younger dragon near the back kept starting to speak, then stopping. The one with the dark scales looked annoyed, but stayed quiet. They were afraid to disagree. Afraid of me? Afraid of looking weak in front of the others, maybe? Or afraid of being wrong. I do not know exactly, but they definitely were not saying what they actually thought. Silvara was quiet for a moment. In 3 hours of council, you identified the core dysfunction that has plagued my government for decades. My advisors spend their time calculating positions instead of solving problems. It is not entirely their fault, David said. The whole system encourages it. You asked for other perspectives and got silence because speaking up means risking looking foolish or disloyal. Easier to stay quiet and agree. So how do I fix it? I'm not sure you can, not within this format. David gestured around the chamber. This whole setup is designed to emphasize rank and formality. You sit up high, they sit below. Everyone speaks in order of importance. Everything about it says hierarchy matters more than ideas. You think the structure itself is the problem. Part of it, yeah. Hard to have honest conversation when everyone is worried about protocol. Silvara stood and paced, her claws clicking on the stone floor. What would you suggest? What if you did smaller meetings? Less formal? Maybe don't even sit in rank order. Make it feel more like a discussion than a performance. My advisors would find that extremely uncomfortable. Probably, but being comfortable has not been getting you good advice. David watched her pace. Look, you asked me here because you wanted someone outside the system. I'm telling you the system itself is broken. Tweaking policies will not fix that. You need to change how you interact with the people advising you. Silvara stopped pacing and looked at him directly. Would you be willing to help me try? To sit in on these smaller sessions and observe? For how long? As long as you are willing to stay. Weeks, perhaps months. David thought about his shop, about Beth managing things without him. about the life he had built that was simple and comfortable and made sense. Then he thought about Silvara on that observation deck, talking about centuries of loneliness. About an empress trying to change an empire because a repair shop owner had treated her like a person. Yeah, okay. I will help. Relief flooded her expression. Thank you. I know this is a significant imposition. It is definitely weird, but I think it matters. David stood up. So, when do we start? Tomorrow evening. I will arrange a small gathering with my closest advisors. Informal setting, no thrones or formal seating. We will see how they handle it. They're going to hate it, almost certainly. Silvara smiled slightly. But sometimes discomfort is necessary for growth. That sounds like something I would say. I have been paying attention to your philosophy. She moved toward the chamber exit. Come, I will show you the palace libraries. If you're staying, you should understand our history and culture better. They walked through corridors together, Silvara explaining the significance of various artworks and architectural features. David asked questions and made observations, treating her like he would any tour guide. Palace staff stared but said nothing. In the library, surrounded by thousands of years of recorded knowledge, Silvara showed him texts about dragon culture and imperial history. David skimmed through a few, trying to understand the context he was working within. This is a lot to learn, he admitted. You do not need to know everything. You just need to see what we cannot see about ourselves. That is a lot of pressure for a repair shop owner. You keep saying that like it diminishes your value. It does not. Silvara selected another text. You built something successful through honesty and fair dealing. That is exactly the perspective I need. David looked at the ancient texts surrounding them, then at the dragon empress who had asked for his help. He still was not sure he was qualified for this, but he was committed now. Okay then, he said. Let us figure this out together. Silvara's smile was genuine and grateful. Together. I like that word. They spent the rest of the evening in the library, David learning and Silvara planning. Outside, the palace hummed with gossip about the human advisor and what his presence meant. Change was coming, whether the Imperium was ready or not. The informal gathering happened in a smaller room that Silvara normally used for personal study. She had arranged comfortable seating in a circle with no clear hierarchy. When the 5 senior advisors arrived and saw the setup, their confusion was obvious. Your Majesty, one of them began carefully, where should we sit? Anywhere you like, Silvara said from a chair in the circle. This is meant to be a discussion, not a formal session. David sat opposite her, watching the dragons try to figure out appropriate positions. Eventually they settled into seats, though several looked deeply uncomfortable. One older dragon kept glancing at where a throne should have been. I have asked David Rivers to observe our discussions and provide outside perspective, Silvara began. He has no political agenda and no stake in our traditional hierarchies. I value that objectivity. The advisors looked at David with mixed expressions. Some seemed curious, others skeptical, one openly hostile. Forgive me, Majesty, said the hostile one, a dragon named Gareth who David recognized for the council session. But what qualifies this human to advise on imperial matters? He sees what we miss, Silvara said simply. Now, I want to revisit the Centauri trade situation. Not to finalize anything, just to explore possibilities we might have missed. There was uncomfortable silence. The advisors glanced at each other, waiting for someone else to speak first. What if, David said quietly, you start by asking why they want to renegotiate? Like, what is their actual problem? Gareth bristled. We do not negotiate from a position of assumed guilt. I am not suggesting guilt. I am suggesting understanding. David kept his tone neutral. You cannot solve a problem if you do not know what it actually is. The problem is their disrespect for imperial authority, another advisor said. Or maybe their shipping costs increased and they need more efficient routes, David countered. Or their trade patterns shifted and the old agreements do not work anymore. You do not know because you have not asked. The youngest advisor, who David had noticed wanting to speak during the council session, leaned forward. He has a point. We assume challenge before investigating circumstances. Are you suggesting we appear weak by asking questions? Gareth said sharply. I am suggesting we appear smart by gathering information, the young dragon replied, then seemed to realize she had spoken boldly and shrank back slightly. Silvara caught David's eye, and he saw she had noticed the moment too. Please continue your thought, she told the young advisor. I just meant, if we understand their actual needs, we might find solutions that benefit both parties. That would strengthen the relationship instead of creating conflict. That would require actual conversation instead of posturing, David said. Probably uncomfortable, but effective. Gareth looked like he wanted to argue, but another advisor spoke up first. The human is not entirely wrong. Our current approach has not resolved the situation. Because we have not been firm enough, Gareth insisted. Or because we have been so focused on dominance that we missed the opportunity for partnership, Silvara said quietly. The room went silent. David could see the advisors processing this, some considering it seriously, others resistant. Your Majesty, one of the older advisors said carefully, these reforms you are implementing, they challenge traditions that have served us for millennia. Have they served us? Or have we simply convinced ourselves they do because changing seems too difficult? Silvara looked around the circle. I want honest answers. No politics, no calculating what I want to hear. Tell me what you actually think. More silence. David recognized the fear of speaking truthfully after centuries of careful positioning. Okay, different approach, David said. Forget about the Empress for a minute. Just pretend this is a group of people solving a problem together. What would you do about the Centauri situation if there were no consequences for suggesting the wrong answer? The young advisor spoke first, emboldened by the framing. I would ask them directly what they need and see if we can accommodate it without compromising our core interests. I would review the current routes to see if modifications are even possible, another added. I would want economic projections showing the impact of various options. A third contributed. Ideas began flowing, each advisor building on the previous suggestions. David noticed them sitting forward, engaged in actual problem solving instead of political theater. Even Gareth eventually contributed a practical suggestion about negotiation frameworks. Silvara let the conversation continue for nearly an hour, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly listening. When it naturally wound down, she sat back with visible satisfaction. That was more productive than our last 5 formal councils combined. The advisors seemed surprised by their own engagement. The young one looked almost happy. This is how decisions should be made, Silvara continued. Collaborative, honest, focused on actual solutions. I want all our future policy discussions to follow this format. But Majesty, Gareth said, his resistance softening slightly. This requires trust, vulnerability. That is difficult for many of us. I know. That is why we are starting with this small group. Silvara stood, and the others followed. I am not asking you to abandon wisdom or appropriate caution. I am asking you to value truth over performance. Can you do that? They looked at each other, uncertain but considering. Finally, the oldest advisor spoke. I have served your family for 3 centuries, Majesty. In all that time, no ruler has asked for my honest opinion without expectation of agreement. If you truly want that, I will provide it. I do. From all of you. One by one, the other advisors nodded agreement. Even Gareth, though his came last and most reluctantly. After they left, Silvara turned to David. That was remarkable. You did most of the work. I just asked obvious questions. You made it safe for them to engage honestly. That is not a small thing. David stretched, suddenly tired. So what happens now? Now we keep doing this. Small groups, honest discussions, building trust slowly. Then we expand it outward. Silvara moved to the window overlooking the capital city. Real change takes time. You prepared for this to be a long process. I am prepared for it to take the rest of my life, if necessary. Some things are worth that investment. David joined her at the window. The city lights sparkled below like captured stars. I should probably head back to Earth soon. Beth can only manage the shop alone for so long. I understand, though I hope you will return periodically. Your perspective has been invaluable. I can do that. Maybe once a month or so. I will like that very much. Silvara looked at him with genuine warmth. Thank you, David, for everything. For treating me like a person when I desperately needed it. For showing me a different way forward. For being honest, even when honesty was uncomfortable. That is just basic decency, which is far rarer than it should be. 2 months later, David stood in his shop working on a stubborn piece of equipment. Beth had updated him on everything he missed while handling business perfectly in his absence. So how often are you going back, she asked. Once a month for now. The Empress is making real progress, but she wants regular check-ins. Still weird to hear you say the Empress casually. Still weird to live it, David admitted. The shop door chimed, and a young dragon entered, looking nervous. Are you David Rivers? That is me. What can I help you with? I am a junior diplomat in the Draconis Imperium. Empress Silvara suggested I speak with you about human approaches to conflict resolution. She said you could teach me more than formal training. David smiled and gestured to a chair. Have a seat. Want some tea while we talk? The dragon looked surprised by the casual offer, but accepted. As David prepared the tea, he thought about how much had changed from that first day when a disguised empress walked into his shop. He had treated her like a normal customer, because everyone deserved good service. That simple act had rippled outward in ways he never could have predicted. An empire was learning to value truth over hierarchy. Beings were being seen as people instead of positions. And it had all started because David Rivers believed in treating everyone with basic dignity and respect. "So," David said, handing the dragon her tea and sitting down, "tell me about what you are working on. What challenges are you facing?" The young diplomat began explaining her situation. David listened carefully, asking questions and offering perspectives based on human approaches to finding common ground. Outside, ships continued launching and landing. Empires continued their complex dances of power and politics. But in a small repair shop on Earth, something simple and profound continued. One person treating another with kindness and respect. Sometimes that was enough to change everything. Beth watched from the back room and smiled. Her boss was still impossible, but the galaxy seemed better for it. David never did charge the young diplomat for the consultation. Some things were more valuable than money. The Empress had taught him that, or maybe he had taught her. In the end, it did not matter who learned what from whom. What mattered was that they had both grown from the connection. And that connection continued, steady and genuine, built on the simple foundation of seeing each other as people first. That was enough. That would always be enough.